Hello and welcome to another episode of AI Inside, the show where we take a look at the AI hiding inside of everything. Sometimes the AI that we're talking to. So, it's hiding inside the voice on the other end of the line. We're going to talk a little bit about that in today's show. I'm Jason Howell, joined as always by my co-host, Jeff Jarvis. Hello, sir.
Hello. And actually, right now, Jason is somewhere in Italy enjoying wonderful food. And we can.
I hope I'm enjoying wonderful food. Well, actually, Okay, so if it's 11 a.m. Pacific, what time is it in Italy? I could be sleeping right now. Yeah, no. The clock is not my friend at this point. The time zones are so completely different. But I am enjoying the first part of my trip. So thank you for mentioning that, Jeff. This week and the next two episodes, no live show if that's your preference. But we will have episodes. We have pre-records with some really interesting people doing really interesting things in the world of AI, as is the case today. But before we get started, just want to throw a big thank you to those of you who support us on Patreon, because that support drives the success of this show. Patreon.com/AI Inside Show. Brett and one of our newest patrons, Charles Gilogly. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it, but I think you're awesome nonetheless, and thank you for supporting us. Patreon.com/AI Inside Show. Like I say every time, we couldn't do the show without you. All right, so the last handful of weeks, I mean, this has been a topic that's come up on the show many times, regardless of the last handful of weeks. But I feel in the last, the previous month or so, we've seen a lot of examples that have really highlighted, or a lot of news that have really highlighted examples of how AI is becoming much more conversant from a voice communication perspective. We see a lot of these multimodal systems like Project Astra that Google showed off at Google I/O, ChatGPT, GPT-4o, all these things seem to really lean into voice conversation with AI as a pretty critical point of the experience. And so we've, certainly tackled that topic on the show many times over the last handful of months. And we have the opportunity to bring on someone who is working closely with a lot of this technology. Not only that, has a pretty cool resume. And I've been following Justin's work for quite a while. Justin Uberti is the co-founder and CTO of Fixie. Justin, it's really great to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
No, it should be fun.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I just want to kind of set the stage a little bit, because I started following you, I think, on Twitter, possibly even Google Plus, because that was what Google did back then. When you were at Google, I know, right? When Google thought everything needs to have Google Plus tendrils in it. You founded WebRTC while at Google, which is a really big accomplishment. You drove the development of the products like Hangouts Video, Duo, Stadia. So I've been following your work and reading you on Twitter and all other places for quite a while. So it's a real treat to get you here today. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
And also, I should also mention, also at Clubhouse, you were at Clubhouse for a little while before co-founding Fixie.ai and becoming the CTO of the company as well. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Given all of that, your work at Fixie you focused on a number of things AI related, but I think the thing that really caught my attention was the voice-enabled AI aspect of what you're doing. We'll talk a little bit about AI.town in a moment. Really feels like this moment in artificial intelligence, we're on the cusp of some very interesting advancements in voice AI. Things are getting a lot more human when we see these examples of talking to AI with our voice. It used to be like, oh yeah, you can do that, but there's evidence that it's still a machine. And I would say that there's still evidence, but there's a lot less evidence of that now. So you're keeping yourself at the cutting edge through your career, and you're doing this now. Tell us a little bit about how your previous experience, Google and everything prior and after, has led you to the work that you're doing with Fixie and with AI.town.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And I think that's actually a pretty good setup of, I've been sort of very just interested in this area for a long time, of the notion that, hey, something's different about conversing with audio and video than just over text. And even text, I worked on AOL Instant Messenger. That was like the first thing I did, like, when I just kind of joined the industry. And I thought that was like magical. The fact that you could just send a message and it would instantly appear somewhere else, like across the world, like immediately. But as time went forward, the notion that we could then add audio and video to that mix, and just the additional sort of like weight that media carried. I think what we're seeing right now with apps like Instagram, TikTok, they're all going kind of video centric because it's just a much more salient medium. That there's just something like a little bit more that hits a little different, as we like to say at Clubhouse, about things like voice that are different than just reading. And so, chat rooms had been around for a long time, and at Clubhouse we saw that just the impact of people being able to sit around and almost like just like shoot the bull, to just talk, and just the value that provided of just that hearing a familiar voice and just hearing people laugh as you talk and these sort of things. And I think that's just something that's not present in a text-only communication.
So describe what you're doing at Fixie.
So, our thesis then is sort of the same, that when we look at ChatGPT, an amazing accomplishment, the ability to type in really almost anything and get out like, a very human sounding response. But it still sort of feels in many ways, you have a new command line and you type in text, you get out text. And when I talk to people who are sort of outside the AI bubble, outside the industry, about are you using ChatGPT, a lot of times the answer I get back is, I don't know what to type.
So common. Oh yeah, I've heard that so many times. And actually I felt that too when I was first stepping into AI. I was like, I know this is powerful, but I have no idea what I'm going to use it for. And all it took was for me to continue to almost force myself to turn to it first for things that would bubble up. And then it started to become really clear to me.
Yeah, right. But I think that it's just a little bit alien. First of all, talking to this AI, but just the overall interaction mechanism, it's different than the way most people prefer to interact. And I think that's the thing that we saw such, on Duo, on Google Meet, that when people want to have an important conversation, when convenience isn't top of mind, the modality they want is either in person or voice and video. And, just the impact of the pandemic and seeing, the use of Meet and similar tools just showed like the value of that kind of live synchronous communication. And so it's no surprise then to think when we talk to AIs, shouldn't we expect the same sort of thing? Shouldn't we expect that, the modality that humans are born with, the ability to speak, everybody can speak almost. And it's just like a much richer way of interacting. There's not just the textual content of what you're saying, but all these, things of tone of voice and like things that are sort of you're familiar. What does your voice sound like? Can you be known just from the first words you say of who it is because of like that unique timbre that your voice has? And in the speech domain, we call these paralinguistic cues, and I think it just leads to a thing where the voice just. It almost it's like it's processed at a different level in your mind. It sort of hits a little differently, and it's much more familiar. It's much more engaging, and I think that we're now at the cusp of this basically time when AIs now will have the ability to really interact, using like speech and I think eventually embodiment and vision. And so at Fixie, we're basically creating some of the tools to kind of really empower this sort of technology for AIs to really interact. Just as naturally with voice as talking to another human. And we're trying to figure out, can AIs tell jokes? Can they be funny? Can they be witty? Can they be zany? And AI.town is a place where you can kind of interact with these AIs and, have these experiences over voice.
So I'm going to, pardon me for a plug for a moment. I wrote a book called The Gutenberg Parenthesis, which is really about the age of print and text as an exception. And before society was conversational, and then it became dominated by text. And I think we're returning to a conversational society now. And it's in fits and starts. When radio came, newspapers insisted that the ear was not a good way to learn things, that it had to be through the eye, because of course newspapers made text for the eye. And so I think we're coming, kind of full bore but we're out of practice and we don't know how to do this, I think, as a group. And so I wonder whether there are, do you think people have to relearn how to have conversations, whether it's with themselves or machines?
I think that it's still people have a sense of, when they interact with their friends, they interact with like their family, like they talk. And so, but to talk to a computer, like I think that's a little bit of a chasm to be crossed, but I think it's not a big one. When we were starting Fixie, I heard from people who basically said, Justin, I don't think people want to talk to their computer. And I said to them, look, you're talking to your computer 2-3 hours a day. And
Just
they said,
the fingers.
Well, right. Well, they're saying like, oh no, I'm not talking to my computer. I'm talking to the other person on the other end of the call, my Zoom or Teams call or whatever. I'm not talking to my computer. And I said, well, but imagine on the other side, it's an AI. It's the same sort of thing. Like you're not talking to you could say you're not talking to the computer. You're talking to the thing that actually, is you're having a conversation with. You're having a conversation with this AI or this intelligence or this thing that's helping you or coaching you or serving as a companion. And, you're going to think about that the same way that, you do a Zoom call in a couple of years, I think. It's just, people they can talk much faster than they can type. And there's just much more information communicated in voice than in like typing out a text message.
Yeah. What kind of comes to mind for me as we're talking about all of this in the context of video conferencing, apps, which actually you've had a lot of experience with online video conferencing with Hangouts video and Duo and everything, is that what I'm starting to see now with AI in chat apps is here's an extra, like if we're in a group and we are humans chatting with humans, here's an AI that's also part of the group that brings that extra intelligence that appears like another human in the group that you can integrate and pull in. And it almost seems like with voice AI kind of hitting the point to where we're getting to this place where it really does sound human and is really great at parsing the conversation and potentially being an assistant there with you, that we're not too far from that AI voice being a part of our conversation, like our actual conversations on in a group sense online, and being essentially another collaborator right there that we can use our voice to communicate with. I don't think we're very far from that. Maybe it's already happening and I just haven't seen it.
I think that, absolutely, these things are happening. And I would say that the voice part is actually probably coming along a little faster than the, assistant part. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that we often expect our assistants to go take actions on our behalf. And I think one of the things that current AI struggles with is the lack of a sort of internal review process or whatever, or thinking about, is this the right thing to be doing? And as a result, I think we're uncomfortable by asking AIs to go take actions for on our behalf, especially actions that are irreversible, like sending an email or even sometimes even like scheduling or things like that, because they always want you to review it to make sure, did the AI make a mistake or not? But one thing that the AI doesn't tend to make mistakes in is in dialogue. These AIs, they're large language models, and the language part, like this is what they're trained to do, is to really talk and sound like they're a human, because they've been trained on these enormous volumes of text. And so they're very good at conversation. And conversation also has this nice property where it's naturally self-healing. Humans mishear things all the time in conversation.
I like that. Yeah, right.
And like, the conversation doesn't stop, doesn't lead to like the wrong thing happening. You say what? Or like, is that true? Or I didn't catch that. Or, oh, I thought you meant that. Like, there's all these natural ways where a conversation, if it starts to go off the rails, can be brought back on just by the fact it's a two-way exchange of information.
So let me ask the obvious question, which I'm going to ask about anthropomorphization, especially after GPT 4.0 and the hubbub around Scarlett Johansson, but really more about the question of, and this is from the Stochastic Parrots paper too, when people are fooled, is getting people to believe that they're talking to a human the goal, peril? What's the ethical structure that you want to create around this technology that you're creating?
I mean, our view is that this sort of wave is coming, but I think that the right way to experiment with it and understand it is in a low stakes environment where it's primarily for chit chat and entertainment purposes, and that's kind of what we've done with our site AI.town. We basically created this environment where you can talk with a number of different AI personalities. And, the conversation is the key aspect. These AIs, they'll actually have their own sort of lives. They'll make social media posts. You can text them. You can have a voice call them. And, we've gotten a number of really great reactions, from people interacting with this sort of stuff. And so, in terms of anthropomorphization, do we worry about, people ascribing sentience or consciousness to these AIs? Like, well, no, because it's clearly sort of set up here in an entertainment sort of structure. Uh-huh. And, I think that's the right way to kind of edge into this technology and see where things go.
But you're the front, and I'm not trying to lead you here, honestly, but I think that because you are a leader in this and a pioneer in this. I'm not one who engages in moral panic. I'm not one who gets all worried about it, but I am fascinated by, and I also think it's too early in many ways to set standards because we don't know what this stuff can do. Nonetheless, you're at the early edge of this, and you have an opportunity, I think, to define. So I'm trying to hesitate not from doing this. I'll do it. What's bad use of this technology?
I think there's some pretty obvious immediate harms that one could point out of, cloning people's voices and using them to defraud others. Right. I think that's something that is going to be, something that people will be very conscious across the industry. And some of the leading sort of speech providers are already doing a lot to try to prevent this, watermarking the voices, insisting on consent and even forms of consent where you have to make a video and hold up an ID. I think there are real challenges around this. I do think we have some legal structures to deal with this, but to be honest, I think there was a point in time where people sort of felt you could trust something that was like published text and say, if this text, I show it to someone, I can believe that that's what this person actually said. Well, we know that's no longer the case. We're also getting to the case where you can't really believe that a photo, is necessarily actually a photo of a real event that occurred, with generative AI. And there's some techniques for watermarking photos and everything. But I think that's an area where, again, most people probably don't believe photos, have quite the same salience anymore. And I think we're probably getting to the same area with voice, is that, because the voice cloning is certainly possible, you can't say authoritatively that a recording that sort of sounds like person X is definitely person X. And so, even stepping away from, what should we think about people talking to AIs rather than other humans? Which one could say is really just rediscovering the art of conversation.
Yep.
I think that there's some more just obvious potential harms, and I think that folks who are working in the space have thought about this stuff very carefully in terms of how might some of these things be used, and have put some defenses in already against that.
Yeah, back to your point of print. Sorry, I'm going to nerd out from my print stuff. But when print started with movable type, it was not trusted because there was no provenance, and anybody could make this pamphlet, like anybody can make a tweet, right? And we created institutions of editing and publishing and structure to verify the authenticity. So I think that's the opportunity here: is where do you get your AI from? Where do you get your voice from? What's its provenance? What does it know? What does it do? Who brought it to you? Are going to be important questions, and those are human questions.
Yes,
and those are opportunities.
Mm. Yeah, indeed. Now, you've mentioned the work that you're doing with AI.town, which, I kind of showed it off. It's got a very colorful approach to it. It's almost like it's having virtual or actual spoken conversations. I guess you can text with some of these characters as well. I'm curious to know with these characters, and you can actually go in there and you can create your own characters and kind of create a backstory for them. And yeah, it's a really cool kind of way to do this, like you said, in a low stakes environment, somewhere where you can kind of play around with the technology. And in my playing around with it, it kind of reminded me of, not that I have a specific example to draw from when I was younger, when I was a kid playing with technology or games, much much more rudimentary games, but there was a little bit of like this is fun, this is interesting, this is unexpected, with all the different voices and the characters and everything. Like, what are some of the surprising things that you've seen from users as they begin to interact with some of these characters on the site?
So, we first got a taste of this when the first version of AI.town was a holiday themed thing that we created called HiSanta.ai. And this was our sort of idea of, let's take some of the tech we've been building around making really lifelike voice interactions with AI and kind of use it to power Santa Claus and his friends. And we sort of put it out and thinking like, this will be an interesting thing to see if the models work, the service works, like, do people actually like this? And our demand was way past what we expected. We ended up spending a lot of Christmas time kind of, manning on call and turning up servers and things like that, and talking to our various providers to make sure the stuff didn't fall over. And it sort of tapped into a couple of realizations. One being that people really enjoyed, having some of these conversations to fictional characters. And, I think, when you think about like, what are people using it for? There are many people who through print or books, TV, movies, like there's fandoms, there's characters that people are really excited about. And the opportunity to interact with them directly, ask questions about their canon and stuff like that, is actually something that there's a lot of demand for. And it turns out Santa Claus is like a really popular fictional character, and so you have kids talking to did I just spoil the plot there? There's kids talking to Santa Claus, but then there's adults talking to Santa Claus, and this bad Santa character you have up here, a lot of conversations, and one of our most popular characters, where bad Santa is like, you can read the sort of description there. You'll find me in the alley behind your local rundown mall. And, the question of, can these characters be, we call them townies here in town. Can these townies be funny? Can they be witty and a little bit like, shoot off the cuff remarks? And bad Santa definitely does. Like, he can have some pretty awesome roasts. You can see just some of the things there. Yes, exactly. And people have long conversations with him, and it's just the kind of thing where we wanted to just find some things where people could have a wholesome, interesting conversation with some of these AI personalities, and try to find out what are the places where you'd find actual resonance with what people are interested in talking about. And it turns out that these fictional characters are actually a pretty rich source of enjoyment and interesting conversations.
What do you have to do to create the fictional character? How deep do you go in the description to make it work as a character?
We have a setup flow that we've optimized, several times over. You can actually do it all through voice naturally, and it asks you a few questions, and it kind of helps build out the backstory. But we find that, one thing that LLMs are really good at is role play. You say, you are XYZ and you were born here, and this is this, and you're interested in this thing, and you don't like this other thing. And the LLM will just sort of run with it. And we talk about hallucinations and LLMs as like a bad thing. But when you're in this sort of fictional AI character thing, a hallucination is a good thing, because it's like, what's my favorite food? What is my favorite food? Oh, my favorite food. Oh, I love steak tacos or whatever. And like, they'll go and keep going, and just at any time, just keep inventing new things to sort of fill out their personality or keep the conversation going. And, mindful that, the LLM mindful that like it has to sort of stay in character and not like, forget things that are already said in the conversation. And it makes for a pretty interesting chit chat.
Yeah, that seems to point out the fact that, like what you said about hallucinations, I think hallucinations related to AI, it's very common to hear that be a negative connotation, but it really depends on the context, right? If what we're looking for are facts, then a hallucination is actually a very bad thing. If what we're looking for is creativity, a hallucination could be an amazing thing because you don't know what it's going to give you. And to a certain degree, it mirrors what we as humans do in a certain sense. When we're being creative, we're creating something out of nothing. And, that isn't entirely always defined by a specific piece of information or anything that's directing us to do it. We just put a line there because it seemed like it would be a good idea or whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Guardian had a story a week ago or 2 weeks ago arguing that AI could cure the downward spiral of human loneliness. Mm-hmm. Do you have that highfalutin a goal, or is it more just fun?
I mean, that's a pretty lofty bar there.
Yeah, it is.
But to come back to the comment was made earlier of having lost the art of conversation through our phones and text messages, and I think there could be something to be said for that. Of one thing we've seen a use case for AI.town is folks who speak English as a second language. And might not be fully comfortable, having a dialogue with somebody over English, but that you talk in a non-judgmental setting, with one of these characters, and like you can even ask them, point out mistakes if I make any mistakes, and they love it. And people have written in to tell us this on our Discord.
That's fascinating.
That is fascinating. That actually makes a ton of sense. Because my only example of this was, a couple of decades ago when I knew I was going to live in Montreal for like 6 months. I didn't know French, and my girlfriend at the time, we ended up getting some sort of CD-ROM that tells you about when this was, but it was some sort of CD-ROM that I used to try and learn French and everything. And they have, had their own little exercises on how to speak and, speak it out and, oh, you're wrong, you're right, or whatever. It wasn't doing any sort of voice recognition, obviously, at that time. But something like this would be incredibly useful. And it seems like it's the perfect application for these systems because they're very good at understanding the words that we're saying. They're very good at translation. And, that's such a great tool.
And you don't have stage fright talking to
it. Yeah, you don't have to worry about being judged. That judgment piece isn't there because because going in, hopefully going in that you're not actually talking to a humanized pickle. You know what I mean? It's an AI.
Yeah. Pickle P is great. It's one of our zaniest characters. But I think that not being judged is an important part. Yeah, I think that if we think about the loneliness thing, I think that could be an important part of like people are afraid to like expose their real self sometimes, and I think that having a confidant where you could be your real self without the thought of being judged, it seems like I think that'd be naturally a net positive and help build confidence and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Is the town project a business or is it a demonstration of the power that you're creating?
It's a business in a few different ways. There are a number of partners we're talking to who've seen like this technology, and you say, "Wow, imagine that for our character XYZ. We'd love to be able to enable that, or we'd love to be able to put this technology inside this device or this other thing." And without getting into the exact details, there's definitely a lot of interest in this conversational scenario. And you can imagine just a lot of potential things, even around, talking to Santa Claus and everything, where like, you could, we forget sometimes in the industry that like, this technology, we build it. Like, it still seems very magical to an enormous amount of people.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It's like my wheels are turning. Suddenly you can a Jack in the Box can come along and say, "Hey, you can go to our site. You can actually have a conversation with Jack." And I'm sure that's if that's not happening already, that's right on the other side of what corporations are going to think about doing because they want customers, they want people to engage with their brand in that way. This technology really encapsulates that. What are some of the more kind of challenging aspects of working with speech-to-speech models right now that maybe you didn't foresee at this point in time?
Oh man, yeah, we could go on for a long time about this. I think this is one of the reasons that I think people have been maybe a real bit reluctant to fully dive in on speech. Is there are a lot of challenges because the human ear is just such a good discriminator in terms of knowing like what sounds right, what sounds wrong. And you have one of the things that sounds wrong is when it takes the AI a long time to respond to you.
Yes, latency. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so like within the sort of Duo and Google Meet and this sort of world, we had a very strict set of standards of that. We aim for 250 milliseconds, time between when you'd stop speaking and the time the person on the other side of the call would hear it. And so this like very, very sub-second latency, was something that we sort of designed for the system. WebRTC, like a million things went into that to make it more performant and really try to keep this natural, low latency sort of thing built into the whole protocol. Because it turns out that humans, when they have conversational turns, they alternate turns very, very quickly. And it depends on the language being spoken, but sort of for English, the typical time between someone stops speaking and the time that the next person starts taking their turn is only about 200 milliseconds too. So if you let your latency get up too high, two things can happen. One is you can start having over talking, where somebody thinks that the person is done speaking,
right?
But they're really not, and then they start talking, and the other person hasn't yet ceded the floor. Or you can have things where there's a long delay in voice. A long delay, humans have interpreted as there's something about what I said that isn't quite right, isn't sitting right with the listener. And maybe it's because they're thinking about it, or maybe they're thinking about how to deliver a response that's not going to be a hard message. But there's a very clear thing, and this is documented in literature, that once it goes past about 600 milliseconds, people start ascribing that delay was intentional, because there's some sort of additional thinking going on that's being used to figure out how to say the thing they want to say. And so anyway, there's a lot more detail I could go into there. But I think the key thing is that the latency stuff isn't just like a nice to have. It makes everything just feel a little snappier, but it also changes like the overall semantic sort of feel of the conversation. So a lot of what we have built in terms of, here's HTTP and all these sort of things that are meant for delivering web pages, those things are not what we use for delivering voice. And so we use like WebRTC and this sort of technology because it's very focused around low latency. And I think the whole sort of like AI ecosystem is going to go through a bit of a forklift right now, where it switches out some of the existing ways of doing things and switches in things that are more like WebRTC for getting to this low delay, quick response, conversational interaction.
Well, that's certainly something that we saw. Oh, sorry.
All right. Well, we just demonstrated it.
Yep.
I had a boss once who had very high latency, and I had to warn people who come into meetings: don't finish the sentence for him. He'll finish it. Just give it a minute. So it strikes me that you must be doing a lot of reading, research on the nature of human conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Are there any kind of interesting insights that you've had about us, not about the machine?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a couple of things I just mentioned there, but even the words like or people sort of think of those. Oh, that's lazy speech. Those are things that when you don't know what to say, you insert them into your speech, and you should try to avoid using them at all. Well, it turns out that those things are really just part of a protocol, and that really right. you're sort of working to see like, should I. Am I keeping the floor open or not? I think is really what it comes down to. Is the other person, should they speak? And by using is just like a quick way of holding the floor for a little bit, where is holding the floor for a little bit longer, basically indicating that a response is going to be coming.
Right.
And so like this little signaling happens almost unconsciously, but everyone knows how to do it, and they know like if someone says they shouldn't start talking right away, even though like the time is now starting to accrue and delay since they stopped talking. And so that's one interesting thing. And the other thing is that the sort of utterance, is itself like a special part of the protocol. that it turns out that is like the fastest thing that you can actually voice. And so if someone says something to you and you have a hard time understanding what's being said, and you spent hundreds of milliseconds processing that, but you still haven't quite figured out what's going on, then rather than sort of like lose your time on the floor, people will say, as just a way of expressing, I didn't understand what you just said. Almost like in a protocol term, what you would call like a negative acknowledgement or a knack. And then people sort of understand then that the speaker will then come back and maybe rephrase their terms or whatever. But there's a lot of little fascinating protocol like things that are already part of conversation that I think unless you really start looking into in detail, it's easy to miss.
That's fascinating to me, especially because I'm also, for the work that I'm doing in podcasting on an independent basis, I'm always looking for ways to, kind of improve my productivity and shave off some time and everything. And of course, AI generated transcripts have been a huge boon for me. Well, what I notice is going through the transcripts, those 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 hus, they carry a lot different meaning when you actually see it printed out in the transcript versus actually hear it. When you hear it, like you said, it makes sense. It connects two things. It keeps the conversation going. When you read it, man, it just looks like that person just didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah.
That's a completely different meaning.
I remember. So I one of the first interviews I did on the media, a show that's done out of NPR, WNYC in New York. And as we're walking to the studio, the producer said, I got to warn you, we edit Bob a lot. Why are you telling me this? I don't know what's going on. So what he did was he would restart sentences all the time, knowing that they were going to edit. And not only that, but they did a fascinating episode. You might be interested in finding it. I can try to find it for you, where they do take out everybody's ums and uhs. They smarten you up. And there's a kind of a journalistic question there as to whether or not you're getting a true picture of someone, or whether it's just a common courtesy that if you did a transcript of someone, you would probably delete the uhs, because unless you're trying to make them look stupid, it doesn't add anything. It's really interesting how we imbue some sense of someone's intelligence, among other things, in how they speak.
Yeah.
Speaking on the spot, it can be quite challenging. Putting together a complex paragraph, there's not a processing required, and you start your utterance before you've even really fully figured out what it is you're going to say. And so you see a quote in a newspaper, that's been sort of all the ers, ums, filler words taken out. And now to do the same for an actual sort of video or an audio clip, it's doing the same sort of thing. But I think to your point, though, there's a lot more heavy lifting going on there, because it's kind of starting to distort, what was this person actually like in reality? What was the reality of the thing versus what was like the sort of condensed product that the reporter had a chance to kind of smooth out? And there's
so do you add in those human quirks?
I was going to ask that too.
When I listen to posh Brits, they say sort of a lot. We Americans say like or a lot.
Right.
There's certain kinds of pauses. Are you building that into the output?
So this is probably a time to riff on the sort of V1 versus V2 in voice technology, and that in many ways, what OpenAI demonstrated with GPT-4o was what I consider to be sort of the V2 of voice technology. They previously, OpenAI had their own sort of voice mode for ChatGPT. And the V1 is sort of where you have a speech recognition stage that turns speech into text, then the LLM stage, which is similar to what you're already seeing with ChatGPT, and then finally a text-to-speech stage, which takes the output of the language model and turns it into speech. Now, in this world, like everything kind of gets converted to text, run through the AI, and then emitted back as a speech. And there's really no ums or ers in there, because the language model doesn't think in that context. It's never really been trained. You probably could fine tune it to do so, but it doesn't think it's part of a voice conversation. And so these things don't occur naturally. In the V2 world, what we have is a model that consumes speech from the outside and emits speech on the other end. It's never forced into text in the middle, like in the V1 setup. And in this mode, the training is almost all, to customize the model and make it, fully speech to speech enabled. It's speech, and these artifacts of conversation, these filler words, are part of the training data. And I expect will actually become part of this because, like I said, to participate in this conversational protocol, you need to be able to do these things. Although, maybe you could say that the AI doesn't need to stop to think in the same way. But, I think there will always be scenarios, and there are various technical reasons why, where an AI may be slow in a certain portion to generate, whether it has to retrieve information or something else. And you can imagine then leaning on the protocol that I've just talked about to buy itself time of, or let me think, or, and it'll just seem very natural when it all comes together.
And at the same time, I can see many people recognizing this is an AI voice that's throwing in those interconnected pieces and criticizing it for it, saying, well, it doesn't need to do that. We need to do that because we're human, but it doesn't need to do that. Yet at the same time, like maybe if we allow ourselves to kind of move beyond that, maybe that ends up making the conversation feel more like something we're used to. Yeah, it's a weird line there. I think you can't please everybody as far as that's concerned.
Well, we're now in this new sort of V2 world, I think, and I think we'll be figuring out exactly how should we map, these things from human conversation into how AI should interact. I think it's going to be fascinating. We're doing our own modeling. I think it'd be great to see how GPT-4o works out with the voice mode. But yes, I think that there's a not too distant future where you be able to close your eyes and wonder, am I talking to a person or talking to an AI? And I think that will actually be extremely enabling and potentially helping technologies like ChatGPT really cross the chasm and appeal to a much broader sense of people because all you have to do is talk to it.
Yeah.
Just fascinating work.
It is
fascinating.
It really is.
And let us note that this comes right about the same time that ICQ is being shut down, right? So there's kind of it's really a next generation of human chat.
Right. We're done with you, ICQ. We've moved on.
We don't need that anymore.
Although it will be missed.
I mean, that was a very interesting, sort of one of the first startups of those guys. I knew them, and they basically are running like 6 servers in a closet with their original data center. Yeah. And they made a lot of trade-offs to kind of make that work. But really an incredible achievement. Yeah,
no kidding. Made a lasting imprint on everything on the web, communication on the web. Justin, thank you so much for hanging out with us a little bit and telling us a little bit about Fixie and AI.town. Fixie.ai is the site. Like, I know you do more than just AI.town, and the technology behind that. Maybe just real quick before we say goodbye, tell us a little bit about a project or two that you're working on outside of AI.town with Fixie.
So I think one thing I'll talk about is this new thing, 2 things we're doing. One is ultravox.ai. This is our speech AI model. We've just open sourced this and released it. We were building a community around it. And in some ways, it could be seen as the open source complement to GPT-4o, that we're leaning on some of the work that Meta has done using Llama 3 and build sort of a front end for this multimodal extension of Llama 3 that can consume speech and can be used in things like AI.town to get that sort of really fast human type of interaction where it can understand speech natively. And so we've started up a sort of open source project around this, and have had a lot of interested people who are very, very, very interested to see open source have the same sort of abilities that proprietary models like GPT-4o have. Right. The other thing is we care a lot about speed, and so we've kept a leaderboard of models at the fastest.ai. This is our sort of way of keeping track of who's doing an amazing job on making LLMs super fast that we can work in these low latency situations we just talked about for voice. There are a number of familiar names there, but we were working closely with some of these partners on empowering AI.town, and we hope to sort of see that these numbers continue to go down. We're also going to add a voice category to this as well, so we can see who's doing a great job on actually a multimodal voice. So we care about speed, we care about voice, and that goes into pretty much everything that it is we do.
Love it.
That's great.
That's amazing. You're doing great work. You continue to do great work. I will continue to follow you, of course, Justin Uberti, Fixie.ai. You can find the links to the few other projects that Justin just mentioned at that site. And then, of course, AI.town if you want to have some conversations with some AI characters. And you can have, it's like you have a phone conversation with them. It's really cool. It's worth checking out. Justin, thank you for doing the work that you do. And thanks for talking to us about it. We appreciate your time and appreciate meeting you today.
Jason, Jeff, it was great to be here.
Yeah,
thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Best of luck, and we'll talk with you soon. All right, and Jeff, that is it for this week's episode. Gutenberg.com for everything Jeff has going on right now. I can show it here real quick just so that people know that it's a site that exists
with
magazine
discount codes.
With discount codes, magazine, and then, of course, the big kahuna, the Gutenberg parenthesis. Thank you, Jeff. Next week, we actually talk with someone who Nikita Roy from the Newsroom Robots podcast. She's going to join us, and I give you 3 guesses what that conversation will be about. That's right. Newsroom and AI. That's what we do around here. Sometimes it'll be great to have Nikita on. AI Inside normally records live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern here on the TechSploder YouTube channel at youtube.com/@TechSploder. But I am still away on vacation. So instead, you can find a YouTube premiere for this, and which has already passed, and then the next 2 episodes. So just go to that channel at the same time, and you will see a premiere that you can do a live chat with people as it plays for you. We will publish it, of course, to our podcast feed later in the day. We can also you can support us on our Patreon at patreon.com/AI Inside Show, where you get a whole bunch of awesome perks. And you can also have the opportunity to be an executive producer of the show, which gets your name called out at the end, like Dr. Do, Jeffrey Maricini, and WPVM 103.7 in Asheville, North Carolina. One of these days, I'm going to find a way to listen to that on the radio to see, because now I'm super curious. Thank you for your support, y'all. And thank you. Just go to AIinside.show for everything that we have talked about today. It's all published there. Everything you need to know. Thanks so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on another episode of AI Inside. Bye, everybody.